boop 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 boop.
Hello, everyone. I'm glad you could join us today. And I guess Brittany's here too.
Yeah, I'm here.
And
As
I'm
usual.
Joel. Yeah, we're both here. Thank you for being a guest on this episode.
Shut up.
Anyways, Brittany, what are we going to talk about today?
So today we're going to talk about the science of addiction, not just with drugs, but also with things like food, video games, exercise, a few other things.
So, you can be addicted to anything.
Oh, you could be addicted to anything.
Okay, but there clearly is a difference, right? If I'm addicted to the fresh air and the moonlight hitting my soft, naked body while I'm in a river, that's a different type of addiction than, say, if I were to take, I don't know, opiates.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, all right, and we can discuss those, right?
Yeah, we're going to go over why we get addicted to things, what defines addiction, and the different types of things that you could be addicted
Perfect.
to.
You got the research outline I made, right? All right. Well, Brittany, let's get into what an addiction is. What can we consider an addiction going forward?
Okay, so scientifically, addiction is considered to be a chronic brain disorder. So if you follow the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, also known as the DSM-5, it can be classified as a mild, moderate, or severe disorder. And symptoms can fall into a few categories. So there are 4 categories that kind of define how bad a addiction is and how they're defined. So one is impaired control. Another is social impairment. Another is risky use. And finally, pharmacological criteria.
Impaired control. Mm-hmm. I can see that, right? If it impairs your motor skills or capabilities to control your actions or biting your friends, things of that nature.
Right,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, social impairment. Well, what if you're socially impaired before you take the substance? Does that count?
I don't think that counts, but you might be more socially impaired or perhaps even less socially impaired. For example, like if you are kind of usually awkward, but then you're, drinking alcohol to an addictive amount, it could change your personality. So
I see. Okay,
yeah.
so we have a social impairment there. Risky use, I think that's understandable, right?
Yeah.
You little snuggle into something and then you don't wake up.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that
Yeah.
seems risky. The pharmacological criteria, though, that one sounds more
In depth?
in-depth, elusive.
Yes. There are actually 11 different pharmacological criteria. And if somebody is considered to be addicted, they look at these 11 criteria and define how severe the disorder is. So if they have 2 to 3 of these criteria, then it's considered a mild addiction. 4 to 5 is moderate, and then if you have 6 or more, that's considered a severe addiction.
Out of the 11.
Out of the 11.
Okay, and then if you have all 11.
Ooh, yeah, you're pretty fucked.
Okay, all right, well, I want to see how many I have for my own personal addiction.
Okay, let's see.
Let's see. So the substance that is often taken in large quantities or over a longer period than was intended.
Yes. So, for example, if you are given an opioid by your doctor, prescribed by your doctor, some people who become addicted to this will start taking a larger dosage, or they will continue use even after they were supposed to stop their dosage.
I see. Okay. But this can't account for illicit drugs that you never intended to use to begin with, or unless you're taking larger and larger amounts each time in order to achieve the same outcome.
Yes, that's also one way to describe it. So you can start on, like, for example, a relatively low dose of heroin, and then you have to keep increasing that amount each time to get the same high.
As you develop that tolerance.
Right.
Or, in the context of one of the worst addictions in the world, you eat a little cookie, right? But then that little cookie leads to a bigger cookie. That becomes a cupcake, and that becomes an entire cake. Next thing you know, you wake up with chocolate smeared over your naked body and a whole bunch of wrappers surrounding you, and you don't know what happened.
Yeah, the sugar addiction, yeah, it's pretty severe.
Let's not get into it yet. That's an important one. But
Yes.
if there's a persistent desire or unnecessary effort to cut down or control these substances, no. Yes.
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 So for example, some people who will start smoking and be smoking for a while, they usually eventually want to quit. So they'll try to cut back the amount of cigarettes they smoke, or they'll try to cut it out completely. But nicotine is one of the most addictive drugs in the world. So they will try to cut it out, and then they'll just go back. They'll try to cut down, but then they'll go back to the original amount that they were using before.
Which is fascinating to me. Out of all the drugs that I hear of, it's that nicotine, even after you've quit it for months, years, you can still have those cravings return to you.
Right. I actually know a few people back in West Virginia that were on heroin and they smoked and they were able to quit heroin but could not quit nicotine.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so I can see that one being added on to a lot of people's addictions, right? Unsuccessful or incapable of taking it down or reducing the amount that you use it.
Yeah.
All right. That one I think we'll hit a mild very quickly. A great deal of time is spent in activities necessary to obtain the substance, use the substance, or recover from its effects. Ooh, like being chained to the bed and naked.
Why are you naked in every scenario?
Listen, because I'm naked to the truth. I just want listeners to know that we're being open with. Anyway, if you spend a lot of time. So if you're working your job, let's say that you are a pizza delivery person or whatever it is, and your whole goal is to get done with that job in order to have enough money to go acquire whatever the next substance is, whether it's 100 cups of coffee or whatever little schmutty budge, a little Jefferson leg, a little Jamaican rope.
What the hell?
That's what the kids call it nowadays, I think.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah,
You're probably right.
Yeah, I am.
But the point is that if you spend a lot of time in order to acquire this addictive substance, or whatever the addiction is, right? Because it doesn't have to be substances, it can also be activities.
Right.
Much like working out.
Working out, definitely, for the both of us. Also, video games, for example, that's not a substance, it's activity. So, I used to be addicted to World of Warcraft long ago. I would work, and all I can think about when I was at work was playing World of Warcraft. And as soon as I got home, World of Warcraft, and I would play that up until I had to go to bed. I probably slept like 4 hours a night. By the way, you should listen to episode 2 if you want to know more about sleep. And then I would just keep playing WoW, and that was my life. It was all I would do. So I would really cut out any other activity, and it would become a central focus of everything else.
Okay, so if I wanted to be concerned about certain activities in my life, if they are becoming more severe, I could potentially use some of these criteria in order to understand it a little better. So if I start thinking nonstop about a certain task, activity, or substance, it might be becoming an addiction.
Exactly.
Okay.
But you would have to kind of remember that there are 2 to 3 of these that you follow for a mild addiction. Once you start adding in more of these, it might become more severe and something to look out for.
Okay. Going along with that, if we have cravings or a strong desire or urge to use these substances, once that happens, that's another criteria that we can hit in order to go from that mild to moderate, or at this point, I'm almost at severe.
Yeah, so of course you do it and it's great and it's fun and you get that, hit of happiness, and then you want to do it again, and so there's that craving.
Yes. So sometimes I will see people say pull out their phone, right? And immediately go to social media or whatever it is, because those small little dopamine and serotonin that is sent in their neurotransmitters, because they have that small little happiness. And so they have to keep scrolling, so that little craving just to like reach into your pocket and touch it and pull it out.
Right.
Right? Okay.
Yep.
Right. So cravings, I think, can account for a lot of things.
Oh yeah, not just craving for a drug or anything. It can account for almost everything we do. That's enjoyable, at least.
I don't know about the credibility of this particular one, because I have a lot of cravings for a lot of things.
Yeah, well, you must be addicted to a lot of things.
Anyways, recurrent use of the substance resulting in a failure to fulfill major role obligations at work, school, or home. So if you start skipping work, stop doing your school work, neglect your chores at home, or neglect the care for your loved ones, obvious sign.
Yeah, it kind of ties back into a great deal of time spent doing the activities, because it gets to the point where not only are you doing it all the time, you're neglecting everything else. So those two kind of tie in together.
So you neglect sleep, anything else, like you were saying for your World of Warcraft.
Yeah.
You neglect social activities.
Oh yeah, I neglected all the social activities.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. I see that one.
Yeah.
Going off of that, the use of the substance continues despite having persistent or recurrent social or interpersonal problems caused or exacerbated by the effects of its use. So someone comes up to you and is like, hi, friend, honey, dear, your habit X is really impacting this. I think that you might need to look at this addiction that you have, like the addiction to success.
So the next criteria is important social, occupational, or recreational activities are given up or reduced because of the use of the substance. So, for example, if you were part of a sports team, for example, and you got addicted to something else, say you got addicted to drugs or whatever, you might cut out that recreational activity. You can cut out your social time with your friends, etc.
Now, the next one, Brittany, the use of it and physical hazards, right? So if I'm using it and it causes whatever physical hazard, or I'm willing to subject myself to some dangerous event in order to acquire or do this particular addiction, that's also another criteria, right?
Yes. For example, somebody who is addicted to alcohol, they will get in a car and drive even though that they're drunk. I mean, that's a physical hazard. Not just drugs, but also activities that might become hazardous because you are addicted to them.
Now, does it count if I do dangerous scuba diving or caving, climbing, or otherwise do things that cause the adrenaline to rush in my body? Does that count? Because I'm physically putting myself in danger, but for the thing that I'm addicted to.
I don't think that necessarily counts because the whole point of the activity is kind of its adrenaline rush and everything. So I'm not sure about that one, but I think it would be more along the lines of, for example, you were scuba diving. You're like, you know what would be really dangerous and cool is if I just kept going and my tank's running out of oxygen. No, I need to keep diving. I need to keep doing it.
Exacerbating the problem, putting yourself in more physical hazards. But the thing about adrenaline addictions, Brittany, is once you get a little bit, you got to get more. You got to go deeper. The heights have to get higher, the depths have to get deeper, and you have to challenge yourself more and more, right? So, for example, if you were to run a Tough Mudder, for example.
Yes.
Yes. You would get all excited about the things that you accomplished, but now you want to go to another one and accomplish the ones that you weren't able to do, such as the water ones.
Yes, that is the plan for the next one.
So you are addicted to physical fitness.
Yeah, you're right. Damn it. Yeah.
I know. Well, let's see about this physical addiction that you have to weightlifting and being powerful.
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
The use of substance is controlled despite knowledge of having a persistent or recurring physical or psychological problem that is likely to have been caused or exacerbated by a substance. Brittany, that sounds like one we've already talked about.
It totally does. I don't know why it's another criteria.
That wouldn't make any sense. So
No.
if we check mark one of them, we check mark the other one. So there's no way to get around not having a mild addiction.
Yeah, exactly.
To nearly everything.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
All right. So the next one is tolerance, which can be defined by two ways. One is a need for markedly increased amounts of the substance to achieve intoxication or desired effect. And the other is a markedly diminished effect with continued use of the same amount of the substance.
I think it's going to be imperative for looking at certain addictions.
Right. Especially drug addictions, alcohol addictions, because your tolerance will increase, and then you need more and more to have the same effect.
Right. Your body is good at taking away anything that is unnecessary or removing any poisons that it identifies.
Right.
It's funny how we try to poison ourselves.
Yeah, we really like poisoning ourselves, don't we?
So along with tolerance, one that is paired with that is withdrawals, right? So withdrawals can also be characterized by two things. The characteristic withdrawal syndromes for that substance, according to that DSM-5 that we talked about before, right? So each substance will have a particular withdrawal characteristic that you can observe.
Yeah, right? Some can be very, very dangerous. So, for example, withdrawal from alcohol or heroin is very dangerous. Some are a little more mild, so caffeine withdrawal. You just get kind of tired and cranky.
I get very verbose and demanding. That poor village. The other part about withdrawals is you require the substance itself in order to alleviate the problems that occur, right? So that caffeine addiction, if you drink it, you start getting that headache, you start getting that jitteriness, you start calming down again, and you can continue on with your life.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
So that actually will sum up the 11 criteria that are needed to define an addiction.
I don't know about you, Brittany, But thinking about the activities in my life, nearly everything is at least a mild addiction according to this criteria.
I think that does count because a few of these sound kind of similar. But yeah, those are the criteria that is commonly gone by for this.
Right, and why would I do anything unless I have that craving? I only exist through my cravings, Brittany. Zero self-control.
Yeah, I totally see that.
Yep. Okay, so we've talked about these criteria and they sound familiar to drugs and alcohol addiction, but let's talk about some of the other things and get into the minutia of these different addictions that we can have.
Okay, so one kind of addiction that most people may not even think of as an addiction is food. This can be either through overeating, leading to obesity. It could also be an obsession with undereating and anorexia. And kind of in between, it could be the obsession with binge purge cycles associated with bulimia.
I can tell you right now, I'm addicted to food.
I am very addicted to food.
I need it.
Yeah.
Like every day.
Yeah, every day. Like if I just don't, have it for a day, I don't know why. I need it.
Well, that's okay. I was trying to help this one friend kick his food addiction. I failed, but I did help him kick his oxygen addiction.
Oh, good work.
Yeah. Well, everything's solved now. So one that we mentioned earlier, which makes me shiver, Brittany, is video games.
Yes.
Because I imagine it's really impressive that you lost your beard and you lost all the zits that you had on your face after you stopped playing WoW. It's just, it's impressive. The before and after picture. It's like a poster.
Yeah, I should put up my before and after on our social media. Yes, I used to have a really bad addiction to World of Warcraft. In fact, some people get such a bad addiction to these MMORPGs, also known as massively multiplayer online role-playing game, that there's a term called Warcraft widows, where they're like people's husbands, or sometimes in some cases wives, would be so addicted to their game that they would completely neglect their spouse or completely neglect their significant other to the point that they never even saw them.
Wow. Yeah. So they're just completely lost, plugged into their own virtual world.
Yeah, pretty much.
And so as we go further and further into technology, this is more likely to occur to where you start having virtual reality. You start plugging in. There'll be no need for physical connections between people anymore. Because why would you need physical connections? You can create all the connections you want.
Yeah, why would you need physical connections when you can punch dragons in the face the rest of your life? So,
well, I feel like there should be another episode about the technology and AI and how it's rapidly growing.
Do you think that? Interesting.
Interesting indeed.
All right.
But besides video games, Brittany, what's another addiction that we can have?
So another addiction that most people are pretty familiar with is gambling.
I love gambling with my life, but go on.
So yeah, I guess if you like gambling with your life, but more along the lines of, going to casinos or gambling with bingo or the lottery, things like that.
I think that's pretty classic addiction, though.
Yeah.
People will understand.
Yeah, people get that. We don't need to explain this to you. You know what gambling is.
Then why did you even bring it up?
I don't know.
Exercise.
So this is our addiction.
That is true.
Yeah. It could actually be not a great addiction, though, because this is a common addiction for people that have anorexia or bulimia. So this is kind of the way they would purge sometimes instead of vomiting, doing too much exercise. But it could also be for those that rely on, those sweet endorphins to kind of get through their day.
Listen, I don't care what you tell me. My personal records that keep increasing have nothing to do with my requirement to go to the gym at 6:30 in the morning every morning, regardless of how much sleep I got.
Yeah, same here.
I've given up something. I have cravings for it all the time. Oh, God. Brittany, how many of those psychological criteria do we have for being addicted to exercise?
I think we have all of them.
I do get withdrawal symptoms.
I do, too. I get real grumpy.
Another one that came up, which befuddled me, Brittany, was plastic surgery.
Yeah, so this is more of an addiction for the rich elite, but you might see on Instagram, for example, the influencers who are, look a little too perfect, and then some start to get to the point where they don't even look human anymore because they keep getting cut and cut and cut and cut because there's a little imperfection here and a little tweak they can make there. So plastic surgery is definitely an addiction.
I can see that. But along with plastic surgery, I have some of my friends describe when they get tattoos that after they get the first one, they're so excited to get the next one and then the next one. And not saying that tattoos are an addiction, but if you enjoy it so much that it falls into some of these criteria, perhaps that could be another addiction?
Yeah, tattoo addiction is definitely a thing. I actually have several tattoos, and I stopped because of monetary reasons, but if I didn't have that impeding me, I definitely would have a lot more. It's kind of the combination of putting art on your body and the pain from the, actually getting the tattoo. You have the endorphin hit, and then at the end of that endorphin hit, you have a pretty sweet tattoo. So it's definitely an addiction for quite a lot of people.
I prefer my tattoos to be naturally made.
Yeah.
As nature tries to devour my body. But along with those monetary reasons, Brittany, shopping. Oh man, the shopping.
Yes.
Let's get shoes.
Shoes.
Let's not get shoes.
No, I have enough.
Wait. Oh yeah, you have running shoes now.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, you're good.
Yeah.
You don't need anything
I don't
else.
need anything else in my life.
People can obviously be addicted to shopping.
Yeah, so you get that little bit of happiness each time you get something new, and even though that happiness fades after, you bring it home, it'll fade a little bit, and then you just need something else new. So it's very easy for people to get addicted to shopping.
Which is the worst addiction in my mind. Because the idea of acquiring more and more objects scares me.
Yeah, just to cram more shit in your house. I can't do it anymore.
You think you get possessions, but your possessions own you.
Yeah, true.
That's true. But what I'm really getting from this, Brittany, is that regardless of what people can be addicted to, is that it always comes back to those endorphins, those happy neurotransmitters, getting some type of high
Right.
that will make you keep coming back, begging for more and more.
Yes. So we can actually get into the chemical mechanisms responsible for these addictions.
Okay, let's get into them.
All right, we shall. So things that feel good to humans are caused by a release of dopamine. So dopamine is a neurotransmitter that plays a role in reward pathways in the brain, and it's responsible for pleasure. So it also plays a few other roles as well. These roles include behavior and cognition, voluntary movement, motivation, punishment, inhibition of prolactin production, sleep, dreaming, mood, attention, working memory, and learning. So there's a lot of things that it actually does, and it is very important for normal function. But it's also the thing that's responsible for humans being addicted to so many things.
So if something releases dopamine, it has the potential to be addictive.
Exactly.
And it controls all these different roles in your brain. That's a lot of activity for it to control.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, we have behavior, voluntary movement, punishment, and reward. That's like when I had that dog collar on me. All at once. Wow. They know I'm joking, right?
I don't think they do.
Unimportant. So we have dopamine, which is the driver for the addictions, right? Because if we don't have that happiness or pleasure in whichever way, then we can't get addicted to it, right? So if it's nothing but pain, then can you be addicted to nothing but pain?
Oh, yes, you can. We will actually get into this a little bit later. There are certain other pathways that can cause an addiction. Dopamine is responsible for the vast majority of them. But yeah, you can become addicted to things that may not cause direct pleasure.
Okay, well, let's get more into the brain chemistry of it. So what about when I am anticipating this, right? So I think of that sweet steak cooking on the grill, right? And I start salivating. Is it the same way when I'm thinking about the addictions that I have when I want to go home and play games?
You going home and playing games, okay. So addiction is actually composed of 3 stages, and that is the first one. It's the preoccupation and anticipation, and this is governed by 2 different structures in your brain. The first one is the prefrontal cortex, and that's the front part of the frontal lobe, and that's responsible for decision-making, personality, and social behavior.
Okay.
And the other one is the hippocampus. So that's a curved structure in the medial temporal lobe on either side of your brain. So you actually have 2 of them. And that's responsible for long-term memory storage and emotional responses.
The hippo inside of me needs to both remember and, what do you say, emotional response?
Yeah.
I do have the emotional response of a hippo.
And a hippo never forgets.
And a hippo never
That's
forgets
the saying, right?
to kill. We have the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus. Now, what about binging and intoxication? What does that have to do with these 3 stages?
Okay, so the second stage of addiction is the binging intoxication. So there's a couple of parts of the brain that this is associated with. The first one is the dorsal striatum, and that's the largest structure of the basal ganglia. It's responsible for motor movement, decision making, and reward related behavior. And then you also have the cerebellum, that's in the hindbrain. It's responsible for motor control, coordination, fine movement, equilibrium, and posture. And the final one is the ventral tegmental area. So this is actually the thing that's been linked to addiction the most. It's structure in the midbrain that serves in reward behavior, and it also is related to intense emotions relating to love and physical attraction, motivation, sex, cognition, and dopamine pathways.
Wow, that's a lot. Okay, so the dorsal striatum. Striatum.
Yeah.
There we go. So like I have a dorsal fin and I want to swim around, so it has my motor controls, right?
Yes, that's one way to think of it.
The cerebellum, like I want to dance around, but only in the back where people can't see me. So it's in the hindbrain, and it has to do with motor control and fine movements, like my sweet, sweet toes dancing about. Cerebellum. Okay, and then we have the ventral tegmental.
Ventral tegmental area.
Okay, I feel like this needs a little bit more explanation.
Yes. Because it's so important in the role of addiction, it's been studied very thoroughly relating to addiction disorders. You can actually have disorders in this area of the brain, and this can lead to several other disorders besides addiction, including Parkinson's disease, ADHD, and schizophrenia. These are all things that are linked to dopamine dysfunction.
I see. So all of these things related to dopamine, because as we talked about, dopamine isn't just a happy feeling hormone. It actually controls so much inside of our brain.
Right.
So if we have an imbalance either way, it can create some severe reactions or diseases that our brain will just succumb to.
Yes. So if you don't have enough dopamine, you might start to have some of these symptoms of these disorders, and if you have too much, sometimes you might have an addiction.
So what about when I take drugs and we enter this part of the brain? What happens?
Okay, so the neurons in this part of the brain are stimulated upon exposure to addictive drugs. So this will actually increase the dopamine release in this area of the brain. That's why when you take a drug, then it feels so great, but then eventually you're going to crash again and you're going to want more of it.
I see. So you shoot it all off, right? So we have a certain concentration of the dopamine inside of our body, yes? And what you have are these uptake inhibitors, right? And so these drugs that keep these uptake inhibitors, meaning that the dopamine stays in this particular part of your brain for longer and longer, means you can get happier and happier. So these dopamine uptake inhibitors, once they decouple from your brain, they will start floating off and you'll process them and they'll excrete out of your body one way or another, right? So what you're telling me is that we're keeping more and more dopamine in these particular areas, just like anything else. If you start swelling something with a compound, eventually it'll become similar to a toxin. So that will lead to some of the diseases that we previously mentioned.
Yeah, pretty much. So then we can also kind of talk about the last part of addiction, and that's the withdrawal symptoms. So this is associated with the basolateral amygdala, or the BLA, and this is the part of the brain that's responsible for emotional arousal, fear, and stress. And it's also associated with the central amygdala. So this is stress and fear conditioning.
Stress and fear conditioning. No matter what, you're going to have some type of emotional response to these withdrawals that you're having.
So you might have the irritability, or you might have the anxiety, you might have even the fear of not having it. Oh no, I don't feel normal. I need to feel normal.
I've heard a lot of people say that to me before.
That's scary.
Okay, so we have these 3 stages, and this is a cycle?
It is a cycle. So an addicted person will become preoccupied with their addiction, and because of that, they might make poor decisions, become emotionally charged, or act inappropriately in order to get what they want. And then once they obtain their addictive stuff, since they're rewarded with this large hit of dopamine, and then the dopamine subsides, and they may experience stress and fear, and therefore become preoccupied again by the thoughts of having that dopamine hit. So the cycle will begin anew.
And you go back to that anticipation. Oh, I need this. Then you take time away from whatever you have that's constructive in your life in order to acquire this dopamine blast again, right? You just want to be like slapped in the face again and again. Hit me, hit me, hit me. But with dopamine.
With dopamine.
With dopamine.
Yes. So, besides dopamine, there are other neurotransmitters that we can talk about. One is endorphins. So, endorphins are released by some addictive actions, such as exercise, and they can bind to the mu opioid receptors. This inhibits pain and produces euphoria. So, for example, a runner's high. And then upon binding to the receptor, there's something called gamma aminobutyric acid, or GABA, and this will reduce excitability and cause a calming effect. So the production of GABA is inhibited and the dopamine production is increased. So endorphins are not only released in response to exercise, but also food, laughter, sex, and music.
So I can release endorphins in many ways.
Yes.
All right, Brittany. So we have dopamines, we have endorphins, we have all these happy, good, feely things from whatever you do. And it's released by a whole bunch of different things. My favorite is the exercise. Mm-hmm. But, I guess laughter, food, sex, music, all that's good too. Mm-hmm. But if we have different neurotransmitters, that means that there has to be different mechanisms for how we become addicted.
Yes, there are actually 4 different neurotransmitters that are associated with happiness. So one that most people know is serotonin. This is responsible for actual true happiness and a feeling of fulfillment with yourself and your life. And then there's also oxytocin, which is associated with social bonding, trust, and love. So therefore, the endorphins are associated with pain and stress reduction, and dopamine with pleasure. And these make a quartet of happiness. And these all have different mechanisms as to how they're released and how they affect your body.
Right. Oxytocin, I think most people will know as the love drug. So anytime you look into someone's eyes, have physical contact with them, that social bonding, that'll release the oxytocin.
Right.
So if you're feeling sad, go rub someone.
Just a stranger?
Yeah, just go up to a stranger and be like, hey man, I need this. I getting withdrawal. Or bite them. Either way. It's all the same. That counts as social bonding, right?
Yeah, biting, that's totally social bonding.
I think so. Mm-hmm. So we have this quartet, and you want all of these in your body running at appropriate levels in order to maintain a long-lasting happiness and fulfillment.
Right. So if you're lacking on any of these, you may not feel that, complete happiness. Serotonin is probably the most important one for feeling happiness. So for example, if you have depression, you don't have enough serotonin, so it doesn't matter how much of these other things you have, you need the serotonin. Oh, okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, Brittany, you may or may not know this about me, but I am naturally a very happy person.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And I'm naturally addicted to things that make me happy, very spontaneous, and lack of self-control.
Yes.
Do I have more of a chance to be addicted to things? Are there ways, or are there people that will have more addictive personalities?
So there are some types of people that can be more susceptible to addiction. Alcohol and drug addiction actually runs in families. So 40 to 60% of people that get addicted have themselves a family history of addiction. And children of addicts actually have a 25% higher chance of becoming an addict themselves. But this is kind of unclear if this is an effect of nurture versus nature. And in addition, there's a higher comorbidity of addiction in people who suffer from mental illness.
I see. So if you have this mental illness, then you can potentially get addicted, right? Mm-hmm. So that can relate to it as well. So it might not be that you have a genetic predisposition to this addiction, but if you have a genetic predisposition for a certain illness, that might lead to the addictions, thereby increasing false positive.
Exactly.
For that connection.
Mm-hmm. So depression runs in families, and many people who suffer from depression may turn to drugs or alcohol to relieve the pain.
That would make sense, and it'd run in the family.
Yeah.
Or like you're saying, if you have a certain family that has characteristics that would lead to these addictions. If you have family that has addictions, it's very possible that that nurture inside of that type of household will stem to more addictions.
Yeah, exactly.
I see.
Yep. And in addition, so there's a few other things that can be kind of linked to addiction. So men are actually more likely to use illicit substances over women, but women are more at risk of becoming addicted more easily than men, and they are more likely to relapse. And this is believed to be linked to the fact that women are more susceptible to mood and anxiety disorders, and this is linked further to more intense hormonal cycles.
Okay, so you're telling me that women are in some way more susceptible to mood and anxiety, leading to more emotional swings, leading to more relapses in order to acquire these happy feelings again.
Yes.
But men will just go straight illicit substances all the way.
All the way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anecdotally, I feel like that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And then finally, environment will play a major role in addiction. Poverty, physical and sexual abuse, parental involvement, and peer groups that are around you all have an effect on the risk of addiction.
Yeah, I would say all of that has an effect, right?
Yeah.
Poverty, it's very unfortunate that certain communities inside of our society are stuck in this poverty loop, right? Mm-hmm. So if your parents are in poverty, unfortunately, the way our economic system is built up doesn't necessarily allow for that easy social stratification where you can move along it. Mm-hmm. And it can perpetuate these certain addictions that can run in families. Physical and sexual abuse, oh man.
Mm-hmm. So that's something that's really hard for people to get over, and with good reason, especially if it happens when they're children. So that's kind of burned into your psyche, and sometimes the only way to get over those feelings and get past the pain is to turn to drugs and alcohol or other types of addiction.
And what I would say that goes along with that, as you said, the peer groups that you have,
mm-hmm.
that'll have a strong, drastic effect of what addictions you will pick up, mm-hmm. right? So if you hang out with an obnoxious group of fitness friends, you might fall into an addiction of this exercise. You need it every week. Mm-hmm. You have a social circle that will allow for that to continue, right?
Right.
But on the same note, if you have a whole bunch of smoker friends and you don't smoke, it's very easy or more likely that you'll become a smoker with them.
Yeah, because they're like, hey, if you're stressed out, why don't you have a cigarette with us? And before you know it, you're addicted. So that's why you should always choose us as your friends, because at least our addiction is healthy.
Healthy addictions!
Yes.
I will have to say, though, Brittany, we didn't necessarily talk about sugar, which I still vow is the number one most addictive substance in the world.
It absolutely is. I actually did a Whole30 earlier this year, and I had the most intense withdrawal symptoms of my life because I had to cut out sugar. So I was eating less than 10 grams of sugar a day, and I remember just sitting on my couch, just staring at the wall. I was like, oh God, I'm going to die. I'm going to die. And Christmas had just happened, so I had a plate of these awesome cookies that I had just made.
Just waiting.
They're just sitting there. I'm just like, I need one. I need one. Yeah, sugar addiction is very severe. Not a lot of people take it seriously, but it's actually an epidemic in our culture, I feel like.
It is. And there's several different forms of sugar that become so easily accessible for people that they don't even realize. Like high fructose corn syrup, for example, is a very easy and cheap filler that they've put into a lot of food. And there's food scientists that allow for the development and manufacturing of this use of sugar as this filler. It reduces the cost and increases the cravings that their customers will have as they're eating it.
So they'll just keep coming back and getting more and more and more.
For more and more. Yeah. Just like our listeners, as they become addicted to our podcast.
Oh, you guys are so addicted, right?
We at least have a few addicted listeners.
We have one super fan. Hi, Katie.
Hi, Katie. Please don't listen to this one 20 times.
She's going to.
On that note, guys, it's been a great conversation about addictions. Mm-hmm. I would like, again, to thank the guest for today's episode, Brittany.
I'm going to kill you.
And we've been the Periodic Roundtable. Brittany, would you like to tell our listeners about all of the things?
I will tell them about all the things. So don't forget, you can check us out on social media. We're on Periodic Roundtable's Facebook page. Also, you can check us out on Instagram and Twitter under PRTcast. And you can email us at prtcast@gmail.com.
Perfect. And as always, we'll have the references available for you guys. If you have any questions, please contact us. And Brittany, next week, which I am so excited about.
Yes, so next week, weirdly enough, because we mentioned this already, we're going to be talking about AI and the Turing test.
And the Turing test?
Yeah.
I can turn my hand like 180.
Okay.
Does that make me AI?
Sometimes I wonder.
Sometimes I wonder too. Brittany, I would create body modifications to become a cyborg if I could. Never sleeping, never resting. Must get to the top.
I mean, we'll get into what the difference between AI and actual human intelligence is.
I guess they'll just have to tune in next week.
Yeah, they will.
Great. Bye. Hang it up.